All right, so you're ready to dive into this whole U.S. visa interview thing with us. Awesome. We've got a pretty diverse pile of your sources here.
Yeah, looks like we've got the official government websites, of course.
Oh, and some advice from a university, UMass, I think.
Looks like there's some tips from an immigration lawyer's website, too.
And wait, is that a YouTube video from a former visa officer? Talk about insider info, right?
That's wild. We've got quite a bit to unpack here.
Definitely. So let's break it all down, shall we? And hopefully give you what you need to absolutely nail that interview.
Sounds good to me. I'm always fascinated by how much information is out there on this.
Me too, me too. And honestly, one of the first things that kind of jumps out at me is just the variety of visas. Like, there are so many.
Yeah, right. There are immigrant visas, of course, for folks who are planning to settle down for good.
Right, permanently. But then there's what, the B1, B2?
Yeah, the B1, B2, which is for like business trips or vacations.
And then the F1 visa for students.
Right, F1 for students. So, it's really important to figure out which one is the right fit for you.
Yeah, for sure. It's like showing up for a basketball game with a baseball bat. You got to have the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And speaking of tools, all of these sources, every single one stresses how important preparation is.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, it's almost like studying for a giant exam. I mean, knowing the material inside and out can make all the difference.
Absolutely. But there's also this idea about being yourself in the interview.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that came up a lot too, didn't it? But isn't there like a performance element to the whole thing as well?
Right. It's a really interesting balance. It's important to be genuine, for sure.
But you've also got to meet the visa officer's expectations. Like, how do you do both? How do you be authentic, but also, nail the interview?
It's tricky. Maybe it's more about like showing your best self, the most prepared and confident you, while still, of course, being true to who you are.
Yeah, yeah, the best version of you. Someone who's prepared, confident, and can articulate their goals.
Exactly. And that's where all that prep work we talked about comes in. Research and organization are absolutely key.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you need to know all the ins and outs for your specific visa type, right?
Yeah. And then you have to gather all the necessary documents, every single one, and present them in this clear, concise way.
Basically, building this super compelling case file for yourself.
Precisely. Speaking of which, almost all the sources mentioned the financial side of things as being really important.
Yeah, that definitely seemed to be a big theme across the board.
You really need to be able to demonstrate that you're financially stable and responsible, no matter what visa you're applying for.
Yeah.
If you're a student, a tourist, or a business traveler, you got to prove that you can handle the costs that come with being in the U.S.
Yeah, no one wants to end up, eating ramen noodles for every meal just to get by.
Exactly. And then there was this other thing, this point from the UMass source that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
They mentioned that it can actually be harder to get a visa if you're from a country with, certain economic conditions or a specific immigration history.
Really? Like, what do you mean?
Like if your country has really high unemployment rates or a lot of people have overstayed their visas in the past, then the visa officer might be more cautious with your application.
Wow.
Right.
So it's not just about you and your situation, it's also about the context you're coming from.
It's about the big picture, for
Yeah.
sure. And that's why it's just so important to do all that research beforehand,
Yeah.
Know what you're getting into and be prepared to proactively address any potential issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, we've laid some groundwork. Picking the right visa, prepping like crazy, showing you can handle your finances, understanding the larger context.
Right, right. It's a lot to keep in mind.
It is. But now, let's say you've done all that and you're walking into the interview room. What happens next?
I think that's when things get real. Like all that prep work we talked about, it really comes down to this moment.
Right. It's showtime.
Yeah, and that YouTube video you shared, the one from the former visa officer, they were really big on first impressions.
Yeah.
Like they said, the officer's basically sizing you up the second you walk
Oh,
in.
no, I know. Talk about pressure.
Right. In the first minute, they're forming an opinion. But all the sources, really, they all talk about how important it is to be professional and confident.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Dress well, be polite, make eye contact, all that good stuff.
Exactly. But then, there's this whole thing about authenticity too, right? Like, be yourself.
Yeah.
It's almost like, how do you balance the two?
I know. It's kind of like, be prepared and polished, but don't be a robot.
Right, exactly. The former visa officer actually had a good point about this. They said to avoid, like, memorized speeches,
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, you don't want to sound like you're reciting a script.
Exactly. It should be more like a conversation, you know, natural and relaxed.
So practice beforehand, maybe, but like with a friend or something, so it's not so formal.
That's a great idea. Just to get comfortable, talking about your goals and your background.
And all the sources are like really adamant about being able to communicate clearly, especially in English.
Right. Even if it's not your first language, the visa officer has to be able to understand you. It's kind of a no-brainer when you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. If you're going to be in the US studying or working or even, just visiting, you got to be able to communicate.
Absolutely. So confidence, clear communication, and I guess that practiced authenticity we were talking about.
Okay, got it. But, what happens if you get like a curveball question,
Right.
one you totally didn't prepare for? Is it okay to take a minute, to think about your answer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to have an answer immediately.
Because I always feel this pressure to like respond right away.
I know what you mean. But the lawyer's website specifically said it's actually a good thing to pause and think. It shows you're really considering the question, not just giving some canned response.
Oh, that's good to know.
And honestly, the visa officer probably prefers that too. They want to see that you can think on your feet.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better, honestly.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, the whole point of the interview isn't to like trip you up or anything. It's just to understand you and your intentions.
Right, right. So we've talked about like the overall vibe of the interview, being professional, confident, communicating well. But what about specifics, like for different visa types?
Yeah, let's do that. I know you were curious about the B1, B2 for folks who are planning business trips or vacations.
Yeah, those are pretty common. So what did the sources say about that one?
Well, the biggest thing for the B1, B2 seems to be proving those ties to your home country. You have to convince the officer that you have strong reasons to go back after your trip.
Right, right. That you're not going to, overstay your visa.
Exactly. And that seems to be a big deal for all the non-immigrant visas, actually.
So how do you actually prove those ties? What are some good examples?
Well, like having a job offer waiting for you back home, that's a good one. Or owning property, that could be really persuasive too.
Oh, and family ties, right. Like if you have kids or spouse back home.
Right, exactly. It's all about showing that you have a life you're going back to,
Yeah.
not just running away from something.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's helpful for the B1, B2 folks. But what about the F1 visa? For all those students out there who are dreaming of studying in the US.
Ah, yes, the student visa. Well, the Shorelight source, the one from UMass, they had some really good insights on
I
that.
was just about to say, I think you mentioned that one earlier.
Yeah. They were really big on this idea of articulating your study plans, like really explaining what you want to study and how it connects to your long-term career goals. Don't just say, I want to study in the U.S. Give them the why.
Right. And how those studies will benefit your career back home.
Exactly. Show them it's a stepping stone, not the final destination.
So it's all about that bigger picture again, huh?
It always is. And of course, for the F1, showing you've got the money to pay for everything is still crucial.
Yeah. Tuition, living expenses, all that. Got to prove you can handle it.
Exactly. But there was another thing from the Shorelight source that was really interesting.
Oh, what's that?
They mentioned that even if you've already been accepted to a university, you still need to be ready to talk about your English skills.
Oh, right, right. Because the university might have their own English requirements, but the visa officer wants to be sure you'll be okay in an English-speaking environment.
Precisely. It's like this extra layer of reassurance, showing you're ready to like jump right into your studies.
Okay, so that covers the B1, B2, and the F1. But are there like any general tips that apply across the board, no matter what visa you're applying for?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The travelstate.gov source actually had some really solid advice that's relevant for everyone.
Perfect. Let's hear it. What are the like universal truths of the visa interview?
Well, first of all, organization is key, like really key.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here.
You have to have all your documents ready to go. Passport, visa application confirmation, all those supporting documents we talked about earlier.
Right, no scrambling through your bag at the last minute.
Exactly. You got to be organized. Show the officer you're taking the whole thing seriously.
Yeah, that makes sense. What else?
And then it's back to those first impressions again.
Okay, gotta dress the part.
Exactly. Professional attire, be polite, all that good stuff. You don't need to, wear a suit or anything, but at least look presentable.
Right, it's about showing respect.
Yeah. And don't forget about confidence. Eye contact, clear speaking, answering honestly and directly. Just project that sense of, I don't know, self-assurance.
So we've covered a lot of ground, the
Okay.
prep work, specific tips for different visas, and those universal truths about like first impressions and organization. But let's be honest, this whole visa process can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster, even if you do everything right.
It really can. It's like anticipation, excitement, maybe some nerves, and sometimes even disappointment, unfortunately. So let's talk about what happens after the interview. So you've made it through the interview, got all your documents in order, practiced your answers, put on your best confident self.
And now the waiting game begins. Right. So let's say, you get good news, you're approved. What happens then?
First of all, huge congrats. Seriously, that's awesome. You definitely deserve a little celebration dance or
For
something.
sure, for sure. But then what? I imagine things get pretty logistical at that point.
Oh, yeah. You got to shift gears. Remember all those travel plans you laid out in your application? Time to make them happen.
Right. Book the flights, find a place to stay, all that. And make sure your passport's up to date, of course. Anything else people tend to forget in all the excitement? Anything the sources mentioned?
The lawyer's website mentioned double-checking the visa validity dates. Make sure you're clear on how long you can actually stay.
Oh, right, right. And any special conditions that might be attached to the visa?
Exactly, like restrictions on work or travel within the U.S. Got to read the fine print.
Always a good idea.
So yeah, approval means it's time to celebrate and then get organized. Make sure everything lines up with your visa conditions, whether you're a student getting ready for classes, a business traveler with a whole itinerary planned out,
Yeah.
or just a tourist eager to explore.
Okay, that makes sense. Approval is definitely the ideal scenario, but, things don't always go as planned. Sometimes applications get denied. What happens then?
Yeah, that's the tougher side of the process for sure. And it can be really hard to handle.
It's got to be disappointing.
Definitely. But the lawyer's website actually had a really good point about this. They said that, like, preparing for the interview also means preparing for the possibility of rejection.
Oh, that's interesting, like mentally preparing yourself.
Exactly. Managing expectations, understanding that a denial doesn't mean you're not good enough or something.
Right, right. It's not, a judgment on you as a person.
It's more about, like, the specifics of your application and how well you fit the requirements for that particular visa.
And that's where, having a positive attitude can really make a difference. Like seeing it as a setback, not a failure.
Yeah, a detour, not a dead end.
Okay, I like that. But like practically speaking, what do you do if your application is denied? What are the next steps?
Well, first, try to figure out why. The lawyer's website said you can actually request a more detailed explanation from the consulate.
Oh, okay. So you can find out exactly what went wrong.
Exactly. And then the UMass source, they suggested asking the visa officer for, like, specific feedback. What could you have done better?
So it's like turning that no into a not yet.
Exactly. Figure out the weak spots and address them head on.
It's like getting feedback on an exam or a paper. You can use it to learn and improve.
Great analogy. And honestly, a lot of people get denied the first time, but then they get approved when they reapply. Once
Right.
they've had a chance to strengthen their application.
So the key message here is don't give up. It's a journey, right? With twists and turns along the way. We've covered a lot of ground today, from all the visa requirements to the emotional ups and downs of the whole process.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is, but now hopefully you're feeling more prepared, more confident about tackling that interview.
Absolutely. And remember, preparation, clear communication, and a good dose of resilience will get you through.
We're definitely rooting for you. And hey, if you need more help along the way, you know where to find us. Safe travels.